February 17th, 2026. The title is Rigged ARGs in Fictive Level 1 and Jeffrey Epstein as the Magus. So, what this is referencing is the fact that we are witnessing what I would suggest is a rigged reality game, not unlike QAnon. In fact, it's pretty much the same thing. And the interaction between the consumers of this Epstein stuff and the promulgators of it, the leaks of it, that this is all essentially a game to indoctrinate people into this concept of the world being run by a satanic evil cabal. This is government created conspiracy culture. It's a fake counterculture. It's not an opposition to the mainstream. It's not an alternative. And they're making it very interesting and engaging and intriguing, and they have people digging into these files thinking they're finding legitimate leaks. And this is all reverse psychology. Oh, they don't believe mainstream. They don't believe the government. But if something's leaked, oh yeah, they believe that. So if you look at these leaked files, a lot of them are just anonymous tips that have been submitted, and it's like fan fiction. But because of its context, it has the appearance of being real. So we are in Fictive Level 1. It's a Black Mirror reference, describing how we exist in this shared consensus, which is augmented by fictions, by reality TV presented as news. And the reality TV show we've been witnessing between this saga between Erica Kirk and Candace Owens has taken a very strange twist. Where now the talk is that Erica Kirk is actually quite literally like a rent-a-wife. Their kids were rented. She's a movie star, wannabe, essentially a reality TV show star, who got this marriage as a gig. Although the people making these connections aren't extrapolating from this that Charlie Kirk was fake. They think he got tricked. Okay,
How does the audio sound now? I think the mic was blocked. So they're making this argument that Charlie Kirk is still innocent in all of this, and Erica is some kind of witch, some kind of usurper, perhaps working for some agency, intelligence agency, the Mossad or something, for the purpose of hijacking TPUSA. So that's somewhat plausible. But now what's getting strange about it is they're going into their background, both of the backgrounds. And a lot of Erica Kirk's background is like her being very flirtatious with her best friend and making these statements that get people thinking that maybe she wasn't even into Charlie, but she's just playing a role. And there are rumors they didn't stay in the same house. Well, people are applying the same microscope to Candace Owens and arriving at the same conclusion regarding her and her husband and it being a fake marriage, which makes me wonder, have we ever seen Candace Owens pregnant? I recall they brought that up regarding Erica Kirk, and the answer was a no. But right now, the witch. Do you remember the Jezebel witch story? And I just brought this up a couple nights ago. At the very beginning of this event, there were these witches on Etsy who claimed they did a curse on Charlie. They took credit for it. That story kind of got ignored for a while, but I brought it up because the term Jezebel had been subsequently applied to Erica Kirk, but also Snake Eyes, which has predictive programming for the event. It has an Erica Kirk character. Charlie Kirkland gets killed by getting shot in the neck at the match of Tyler the Executioner. But it was during Hurricane Jezebel, which they called a storm. And then the show The Tempest, another storm referencing the widow who takes over the youth Republican group. And then Erica Kirk is personally referred to by Stephen Miller on stage at the memorial as a storm, the storm. Again, a reference to this Jezebel thing. Well, as we speak, Candace Owens is out saying that she wants to find these witches. So there's a story here. I'm the witch who cursed Charlie Kirk. I want to speak to Erica directly because she deserves to hear the truth. So there's this story cropping up right now about this witch, Jezebel witch, and here's Candace Owens basically saying, help me find her. Now, a couple of things I want to get to tonight. One of them is the book, The Magus by John Fowler. I read it a while ago, but I remember pretty much what it's about. And it is about this eccentric rich guy with an island who controls all kinds of people. But at the very center of it is a satanic cult. And the main character gets kind of swept up into all of it. So there's an author named Peter Levenda who was on the Danny Jones podcast. And what he says here is that a 1968 film about this book, The Magus, somehow has connections to Epstein Island's, quote, unsettling similarities. And there are also others that have noticed what seems to be a predictive programming element in this Black Phone horror story series and Jeffrey Epstein, which we also saw in Blink twice, which also ties in the whole Diddy thing. But I'm pointing out to me that all of this is looking like manufactured interactive myth making, like in other words, psyops, but in the style of alternate reality games where the audience is a participant in it. But anyway, Peter Levenda, 1968 film, is being discussed with Danny Jones. He says, there's a temple to Poseidon on a private island, rooms full of masks on the walls, a wealthy puppet master that the world believes is actually dead. So you have a death faker central to the story. So he says, why do the Epstein operations perfectly mirror the plot of The Magus? And he goes on to Epstein's obsession with the occult, parapsychology, and satanic rumors. I retweeted it. If you follow me on Twitter, you probably saw that. I listened to it, but I haven't seen the movie. Lean Dion says, the Temple to Poseidon in The Magus looks similar to the fake Epstein one. Right. Psyops imitate art. No, I haven't seen the movie, but I read the book. And now that, reflecting on the book, it does have those elements. Although, at the end, it's not really a satanic thing, but it was definitely kind of a reference to Crowley. I think there's a Baphomet thing. But you do have death fakers. So the main character is led to the island mourning his ex-girlfriend who actually isn't really dead. And then you have the old man who's pretending to be dead. So we'll get to that. Candace Owens sending her fans on a witch hunt to find the witches who put a curse on Charlie Kirk. I found an article or an interview with Elon Musk's father. They have identical mannerisms, who talks about witchcraft and how somewhere in their upbringing, witches tried to eat her daughter. Very bizarre stuff, if you follow my timeline. And last week I was talking about taking a trip to Zorro Ranch. And I might still. Some guy from InfoWars went up there. He's called a Christian spiritual warrior. And his name is Joseph Daniels. So he goes out to Zorro Ranch and he starts praying to the spirits or something. And he says that he feels satanic energy and that the devil had literally been summoned there. So you can drive out there. It's just not called Zorro Ranch anymore. And I see a lot of this conversation coming up where it seems like there's this convergence between Epstein, alien, disclosure, kind of arriving all at once. But apparently he referenced himself as a Nephilim at one point. Now, again, you can't separate Epstein from 4chan, from Q, from Anthony Weiner's laptop, which also contains the alternate reality game Skippy. The Skippy video the QAnons took as evidence that they were onto something because they thought it was John Podesta turns out to be a hoax video put out by a group called WorldCore, who create ARGs, these interactive mysteries with random videos on the internet that lead people down rabbit trails. So we're seeing here a successful ARG mixed right in with 4chan, and I'm seeing here this seems to be kind of their strategy. But anyway, there are people making these strange connections, alien stuff, paranormal stuff, and even correlating Epstein with the evil scientist in Stranger Things. And Stranger Things has been pretty big lately as far as the trans shooter thing, which has a lot of predictive programming in the Stranger Things series. But something else too. Someone had pointed out there's a number of Super Bowl halftime show commercials that seem to reference the island, cannibalism, some guy being compared to chips and gets eaten, and there's an Epstein-like character eating like these gummy nerd candies or something. So what's with that? But we'll get to all this stuff. I tend to mark it in my Twitter feed, so I want to go through these things. Also, in some of the research that's come up on Erica Kirk, she's making these flirtatious tweets with a girl who's in a swimming pool on a floaty device that looks like a big pizza. And she says, I know this is cheesy, but I think you're saucy. Now, I mean, what do you make of that? This is straight up Pizzagate stuff. And then I remember her ex-boyfriend had the word pizza tattooed on the inside of his bottom lip. But it's pretty clear here the story's unraveling. So what are we seeing? Well, I think we're seeing this is a deliberate storyline. It's not like we're uncovering something that we're not supposed to find. They build up these characters. This is a soap opera. And this is an ARG. Just as with the Epstein stuff. You see all the Candace Owen fans digging into this character, sharing stuff, creating content, creating buzz, keeping her number one, keeping the focus on Charlie Kirk's dead and look who did it. They're deeply immersed in this thing. So what I'm suggesting is alternate reality games are synonymous with limited hangout operations, where they leak docs to create a community and control it. And that's fundamentally what we're seeing here, both with the Epstein files and now this deep dive into Erica Kirk. It's formulaic. And this might be what they've always done with conspiracy theories from the very beginning. Like, my contention here is that the conspiracy theory subculture, all these conspiracy theorists with their, since JFK and onward, have always been government created, government led, and part of the infrastructure of media itself. So it's not like an outside entity or independent investigators, although there are independent thinkers, but they're the target. They get those who stray from the mainstream and reel them in with real information mixed in with a lot of misinformation. But yes, someone has reported here the Temple to Poseidon in the Magus looks similar to the fake Epstein one. What I'm looking for here are suggestions that what we're examining, what we're collectively experiencing, is a psychological operation, and does it have all the hallmarks of a hoax? Well, for the most part, it does. And the more we're looking into it, the more we're finding these predictive elements. So, for example, this book, The Magus, first time I've heard of it, but also what about Space Relations, written by Donald Barr, about the islands where trafficked teenagers are sent. And then the black phone stuff, which it gets into some strange territory, but we'll get to that. Dave Chappelle shows up at Alex Pretty's memorial in Minneapolis. I was mentioning how nobody cares about Minneapolis right now because of the Epstein thing, and the Super Bowl kind of distracted people. And I guess they had to bring some celebrity out to try to remind us. He was also someone who helped hype up the 846 movement post George Floyd. Of course, we had the death of Jesse Jackson just come up in the news. And then we had that shooter, which we talked about this earlier, but there was a story a few days ago before the shooting at the ice rink where the actor who played Buffalo Bill in Silence of the Lambs apologized, more or less, or said he regretted the role because the way it stereotyped the people who are like trans, like because he's this trans psychopath who's skinning women and wearing their skins. But anyway, this comes after Savannah Guthrie's mother disappears, and she goes on TV pleading for mercy, verbatim, like the mother in Silence of the Lambs. So that stood out because her mother was kidnapped on the anniversary, the 35th anniversary of the premiere of Silence of the Lambs. And then one of the football players at the Super Bowl shows up in a Hannibal Lecter mask with handcuffs. So we just noticed this buildup of Silence of the Lambs stuff. And the day after this actor, makes this statement, we have basically Buffalo Bill, in the news, shooting up his family at an ice rink. But it turns out, and this is a strange twist, this isn't a leftist shooter, but it's a right-wing MAGA pro Nick Fuentes who has Nazi tattoos on his arm. So it really breaks the mold. And I think this is an interesting pivot because what they've been trying to do is get there to be a unanimous agreement that we got to do something about guns. But the right has always been behind guns because it's always been mass shooters who are mentally ill shooting up public schools. Well, they don't care about public schools. And the shooters are usually white neo-Nazi types, characterized by the left as such. So it seems like they manufactured an enemy, a devil that specifically scares the left, the racist Nazi MAGA shooter. And it wasn't as effective on the right. So there was this trend where now they're shooting country music concerts, trying to make it involve right-wingers. Jason Aldean, who's a major psyop musician, friends with Candace Owens. He did videos. He did a video that antagonized BLM. But that's when I started to see the switch. But then in 2022, they started the trans shooters radicalized on Reddit who are also satanic. And this all correlates with the Annunciation School shooter who checks all those boxes. And it was preceded by the movie Weapons, where you had a literal witch responsible for emptying out the classrooms. But Stranger Things encompasses these elements, specifically the satanic panic, which is when it takes place. But this latest shooting seems to be breaking the mold in that the shooter's a right-winger. So none of it quite adds up, although it has both sides agreeing that the real issue here, and like his daughter actually talks to the camera and says he had mental issues. So they're pointing the finger at mental issues. And that can be something they both agree upon because from the very beginning, the left says this shooting was caused by right-wing gun culture. And the right would say, no, it was caused by SSRIs. And this, I've heard this being said since Littleton, looked back, but I noticed it since Adam Lanza, where they're always blaming SSRIs as though that's a big secret. Like, it opens the door to conspiracy theories about MK Ultra, the psychiatrist actually involved in mind controlling the person so they go shoot the school as part of some black op. The false flag theory. And that's been for the longest time, the false flag theory has been the default explanation for the right, for the conspiracy theorists. But they would always throw in SSRIs. So they already accepted the explanation that mental illness caused it. The problem is it's fake. If it's fake, arguing over the cause kind of doesn't make sense. But they don't care if you argue over the cause as long as you tacitly accept that it's real. And with this particular event, I'm seeing unanimous agreement. Both sides agree we got to do something about the mentally ill getting guns. Jungle Jim says IPS called the onset of trans shooters before the trend. Well, I remember before I was actually calling for female mass shooters. There's a dearth of female mass shooters. Why aren't there any? If we're all hit by the same propaganda, and if that's the cause, if gun culture is the cause, then there should be equal representation. And I believe the first one was during, I gotta check. Women's History Month. Yeah, I think it was during Women's History Month. But anyway, we noticed this plot twist. And since we've been observing it, it has, in fact, drawn quite heavily from Stranger Things. But I did see that this shooter had directly tweeted to Alex Jones, directly interacted with several people. Nick Fuentes, for example, retweeting or commenting on Fuentes. Very bizarre. The Nazi tattoos were kind of obvious. Lean Dion says he said something like transphobia is the reason they go berserk. Yeah, I saw that tweet to Andy. No, that's right. So we have the would-be shooter interacting with psyop actors, with provocateurs, with plants. It's a closed movie set. And I'm just pointing out that these interactions I take to be hoax indicators. And these agendas that are pretty like obvious whenever you see one of these events, how it creates these predictable responses, just screams PR stunt. I mean, it's grotesque to use atrocity propaganda to influence public opinion, but that's what we're fundamentally looking at. When you're looking at psychological operations, they prod people, they coerce, they cajole, they provoke responses through atrocities, death tolls. You know, it's fundamentally about psychological terror. So the mother was killed, the son was killed. I saw the guy in the yellow with the 47. Again, I say fake until proven real. I looked at the image of the family. Honestly, it looks like fake, but that's just my intuition. I can't tell you why it's fake other than it looks like if you were making a film about a family of hockey players and had them pose in front of the garage. Like, it doesn't look like a real family to me. But now the other day, maybe even a couple of weeks ago, I said that they have repurposed QAnon and they took Q out of it, but they've just repurposed it. And how instead of now blaming the Mossad for controlling Epstein, now it's the KGB and it's more palatable to the left. Now, again, mind you, I said this a couple of weeks ago. Well, Tim Pool posted today, it's wild how the left is now the QAnon faction. In response to Ellen Barkin, who said, the number of people in this administration connected to Jeffrey Epstein is stupefying. It's correct to say we're in a country run by a cabal of real-life peds and traffickers whose crimes are more horrendous than we can imagine. How much more can we take? So Ellen Barkin, 255,000 followers. Anyway, yeah, he's calling it out that the left is now the QAnon faction. I think that's remarkable because they were opposed to this whole thing. They rejected it, and now they're in it, and they're all about it. Okay, let's see here. Continuing. Michael Lita says, hey, chat, took time off. What did I miss? Well, you missed Wicked and Wicked Part 2 for Good, becoming real life. You might have missed the Super Bowl with the alchemical wedding, the blackout symbolism, the Christ and Babylon Gnostic Catholic Mass element was there, as we expected it would be. In fact, the Rebus, Bad Bunny has the Rebus tattooed on his chest. That's the person with two heads, a male head with the sun, and then the woman crowned by a crescent moon. And, it's essentially connected to Baphomet. And when we were discussing this Gnostic Catholic Mass, they happened to bring out Lady Gaga to dance with him during a particular song. And she was wearing this red flower called the Maga, which is obviously a witch reference. But more specifically, a week before, she was on Golden Globes performing the song Abracadabra, which is the word of the Aeon, according to the preeminent neo-Gnostic cult, which the elite seem to favor right now in terms of the symbolism. It's a more eclectic version of the Mystery Babylon. It's updated, elements of sci-fi, but specifically, it has this central pair of gods, the god and the goddess, that they seem to venerate, but more importantly, it's their son. And the new Aeon actually represents that. This new age represents the emergence of a new god that is the perfect blend of Isis and Osiris, the masculine, feminine. And that's why you have the rebus. That's what Baphomet is, the hermaphrodite. It's all just symbolic. But the alchemical wedding, they even had a marriage on the football field at that time. The wedding represents the merging of the two, the sun and the moon, the eclipse, and the subsequent birth of the new sun. So we're living through the birth of the new age. And this is why you see the occultists so obsessed with tearing down the symbolism of Christianity in particular. Why is that? If you read the book of the law, it explains it, that they're breaking down the traditional religions and crowning the what they call the crown conquering child, Horus, which is the Mars god in the Egyptian pantheon, the hawk-headed god of Mars, falcon-headed. When Musk has the SpaceX Falcon going up there, I think it's pretty much a reference to this particular Aeon of Horus. It's their god, their androgynous god. So it's not a hermaphrodite; he's androgynous. But Musk has kind of taken our expectations from Mars a little bit down a few notches. He's abandoning Mars, and he's promising a moon base. And I asked him about it, but he never answers me. I'm like, Musk, serious question. Why is faking a Mars base any more challenging than faking a moon base? No answer. But it's the same tech. I'm pretty sure the Martians are already here, underground, in deep underground bases, and it's a subset of our population that have been utterly brainwashed. And they think they're on Mars. They've probably been radicalized against us because in their version of things, the Earth has probably already been destroyed by climate change. I'm certain that if there is a breakaway population of Martians living in some deep underground military base, they've been given a totally different backstory and history. There are some indications, if you look at space relations, again, Donald Barr's book, he was the one who hired Jeffrey Epstein. Space relations is about islands of captive populations, slaves, enslaved by psychopaths in space. Well, what's the difference between uncharted waters, islands, and little planets in space? There's no difference. It's all just metaphor. But there are suggestions throughout, like Terra Mar, Ghislaine's little island nation, or her nation, her free nation out in the uncharted waters. There seems to be some suggestions here of off-world places, and it seems it could be all code. What if it's all just code? I'm not saying it's real, but they've given us these storylines that are worth exploring, like space relations in particular has some strange elements, and the whole Epstein-Barr thing is bizarre. There's an STD named after them, the Epstein-Barr virus, which gives you Alice in Wonderland syndrome of all things. Okay, let me continue here. I did a little background here on this character I mentioned the other day who supposedly got some kind of USB from some victims at Zorro Ranch, but there's no way to substantiate it. And this is what kind of made me think that what we're seeing here, when you're talking about these 3 million files that were dropped, you're seeing a lot of anonymous tips. And I think a lot of these anonymous tips, it's basically like feds shit posting, knowing this stuff is going to be found later. Or the PSYOP actors. So the people making tips are basically the writers of the PSYOP itself. I think that might be the strategy. Because so far, you have these things that look official because it's coming from this document dump, but you read it, you find out no evidence, not investigated. Well, the conspiracy theorists will say there's no evidence because they covered it up. No, there's no evidence because there's no evidence. Absence of evidence is not evidence of absence, but they start off with that premise. It's a fascinating ploy and it works. And this feeling of having discovered it really works with them as well. Okay, moving on. I'm finding a lot of stuff about Erica Kirk. The internet just unearthed a massive treasure trove. I don't know if I'd call it treasure. Of old Instagram posts between Erica Kirk and her friend Sydney, and the receipts are undeniable. Listen to this. We already know she treats her life like a movie. It's a movie role. Hourly baby rentals, anyone? But evidence here suggests her marriage to Charlie Kirk might have been the biggest gig of her career. Was the trad wife persona just an act? Because these receipts prove she was playing for the other team long before she met Charlie Kirk. So this is put out there by Project Constitution, 250K followers, Project Constitution, TikTok.com. Big channel releasing it, which makes it think this is controlled release. But what he's basically saying is that she was an actress playing the role of Charlie Kirk's wife. And I think they make a very strong case for it. In fact, it's undeniable at this point, the more I watch this unfold. But my point here again is this. What they're missing in this particular narrative here is that Charlie Kirk was also fake. So they distract them with these stories showing how Erica Kirk scammed him, took over TPUSA. She was an actress. It was all a trick. They lead people into these conclusions, but they've led them away from even contemplating that Charlie Kirk was part of this entire facade. If she can be an actress, why can't he? And you're seeing the actress parts coming out. But this is a typical example of how they control the truth. They control the narrative so the truth never gets out all the way. It's like, okay, let them find out Erica's fake, but lead them to this other conclusion. But this is a great example of a world stage actor / actress. This character we're watching play out in front of us has just stepped out of the screen of so many movies where we've seen her representation preceding her emerging in this form. Okay, let me continue to go down my Twitter feed. Shooting at ice rink ends with 3 people dead, 3 injured. Again, we already talked about that. Still waiting for more details. I don't believe it's real. Again, I'm saying real right now, or rather fake until proven real. Something happened. The question is this a psyop? I would say the way the people evacuate looks pretty real. To me, it does. Doesn't mean anything. Looks real doesn't always mean it is real. It could easily be footage from a drill. I don't know. Peter Thiel tied to Discord's new identity verification rollout. Again, Peter Thiel is synonymous with this transhumanist nightmare scenario that the conspiracy theorist right is obsessed with. Someone called me once, they're like, while you're talking about Netflix and all these connections, shouldn't we be worried about the transhumanist technocrats taking over, scanning your face? Like, no. Okay, so here's a list of the commercials, if you want to look them up. Super Bowl ads that seem to be mocking the Epstein thing. And there were a few of them. You had Ritz Island. So Ritz Island, obviously the island reference. There's a cracker ad about a party. And the people on the island, I think it's Scarlett Johansson, but they're all more or less mocking the people who aren't there. And then you have the Nerds commercial where the guy's eating candy and he looks exactly like Jeffrey Epstein from The Profile. Same jawline, same hair, and they're on an island. And then the cannibalism, eating these little creatures, that's kind of obvious. And then you have the chip commercial, I think it's Pringles, where the actress is eating her boyfriend at a party. They're all eating him because he turned into chips. So again, cannibalism, islands, Epstein's, and those are just a few. Let's see. Lean Dion says the crowd and the players and the ice reaction does seem genuine. It does. It does seem genuine. Are they improving? Or is it real? It's a fair question to ask, however. You can't just assume, especially not now. People used to argue and fight that point, but now no one really does. Okay, alternate reality games. I'm going to have to do a separate video on the Skippy video and on ARGs in general, because it's a useful concept to explain what we're examining. You know, you use the term psyop, hoax. Yeah, that's part of it. But there's the other aspect to it, the engagement. And you're engaging with liars or propaganda disseminators. And the rollout of the story is somewhat influenced by the interaction. And what's the point of the game? To get you to make certain assumptions based on whatever you're chasing. So if you're chasing this information, you probably already bought into the assumption. For example, if you have Erica Kirk derangement syndrome, well, then you're certain Kirk is dead. Charlie, because you're obviously on some kind of attempt to get justice for Charlie. So the ARG concept, I think, is intrinsic to all of this. And then we're looking at, as Tim Pool noticed, the rebranding of QAnon, and now it's been mainstreamed. No new information, a lot of rage bait. Like, apparently, if you got a big scraggly beard and you wear backward hats, there's a gig for you, because a lot of these types, and it is a type, they're being hired, I think, to park at the side of the road and rant about stuff they saw in the Epstein files. But it's always in an indirect way. And it's always cautioning people, you don't want to see what I saw. And if you know how method acting works when people fake cry, there are certain indicators that somebody's about to fake it. One of them is they bug out their eyes to dehydrate them, which helps get tears. Hyperventilation. And remembering something sad. But what we're seeing, and this is a pattern, I've seen multiple ones, where they're telling people about these horrible things. So there's these FBI tips that have been submitted that are being referenced, and people just assume it's real. I mean, Alex Jones really jumped the shark on this one. He went on that show dropping N-words and making these bizarre claims about baby abuse on the islands. Well, nothing he said was true. He said that there was a new dump of videos, all made up. But at the time, he was carrying a bottle of liquor. And I'm starting to suspect that he wasn't really drunk, but that the liquor was to create the perception of it, to give him some kind of plausible deniability for what he's saying, you know, give him a pass. But whatever it is, it's not the first time he's done that. He did that right after the Hunter Biden laptop was leaked. He claimed the laptop had all kinds of videos of Hunter Biden killing children in China. That was right before the 2020 election. But one of their strategies is tell people about how terrible it is and they don't want to see it for themselves. Hype it up so they don't want to look. They did the same thing with Frazzle Drip. Remember Frazzle Drip? And a lot of people claim to have seen it, or they knew somebody like, oh, my cop buddy. Because everybody on the internet has a cop buddy and a sniper buddy. Oh, my sniper friend told me that when he does long distance shooting, he accounts for the rotation of the earth. Yeah, okay. My cop buddy saw Frazzle Drip. Now he has nightmares and he throws up when he thinks about it. I've heard that so many times. Well, Frazzle Drip is a video where Uma Abedin and Hillary Clinton are skinning children and wearing their faces. Now, we haven't really seen a resurgence in talk about adrenochrome very much, although I did see this part in the Super Bowl halftime show where Bad Bunny reaches for a shelf and it looks like a little vial. And people have said, well, the bunny is actually a reference to adrenochrome. So they keep this particular myth going, this adrenochrome thing, which isn't even really based on reality. If it was, it'd be probably available on the streets. And if it had the properties they claim, where's the evidence? Because all of the people that they've accused of using it have aged normally since this has been exposed. All right, moving on here. Just amazed at how they're able to recycle such a huge trove of BS and have people run with it. And it's because of the lack of continuity. And we're stuck in this loop. All right, moving on. Axel Vasa, he's a Instagram guy. You may have seen him. He's got a beard and a beanie. Does a lot of selfies. But anyway, he admits that he's JFK Jr. So he said, my real identity will be revealed soon. Nothing can stop what's coming. In case you were wondering. Okay, let's see. This is another one. There's a new documentary about Kirk. The official story says Charlie Kirk was killed by a lone wolf, but following a money trail to the CIA to the moon cult in Asia, to TP USA's inner circle, a much darker picture is emerging. And the media's afraid to touch it. So what we're seeing here ties in specifically to the film The Tempest, filmed in South Korea. But there's another story here that it wasn't Israel behind his killing, it was the cult of Sungyeon Moon. Another interesting element to it. Again, this is sort of like the JFK event, where you have these spin-off conspiracy theories, all these various whodunits. Michelle Alito says, I talked to some people. A few are so enraged over ICE in Minneapolis. Others don't know what's going on. The latter group seem much happier. Yeah, I've encountered the same thing. And when people don't know about it, I'm always like, good. You don't really want to know. I don't proselytize for it anyway. But I know that in the classroom discussions, everybody's mad about it. Okay, moving on. A credible source here, Ian Carroll says, the Antichrist is going to show up in AI. Again, he says, I suspect that it's AI, the general superintelligence, and you place it in Jerusalem, and that's the center of the AI world that's surveilling everybody. It's the Antichrist, the machine that controls humanity. Sneeko says you're right. He says, maybe this is schizo, but it has one eye, right? Like the 2001 Space Odyssey. All see, very bizarre. I've noticed this also as a trend. So we've been talking about how the far right and the woke right think AI is evil, the devil. Joe Rogan said Jesus is coming back as AI, but now they're conflating him with Hell 9000. But this is a recurring theme here, this AI phobia. But Ian Carroll said, you may think this sounds schizo. And I noticed this is almost like a forced meme where anybody noticing patterns or making connections or evaluating subtext is like self-identifying as autistic or a schiz. Why would you even take that L? Like, I wouldn't go with that. I really kind of avoid that kind of, because it seems to me it's like it's a way of sabotaging a whole area of discourse, like associating conspiracy theory, conjecture, and discussion with tinfoil hats and paranoia. Although, if the tinfoil hat fits, because it often does. But this isn't anything more than some kind of fiction designed to appeal to the people of Trutherville. So it's a bastardization of science fiction lore and biblical lore. And it works. I would suggest that the whole truther movement is, in fact, a state created religion as much as simply a government created counterculture. Restream says, Black Apple Galley says, Bible says the AC will be loved by all and will have one eye. AI. Oh, that's clever. Well, Donald Trump is, in many ways, someone you could plug into that particular story if you take Butler, Pennsylvania as being kind of the head wound miracle thing. But it didn't hit his eye, it got his ear. And I don't know if that's part of it. So now some people believe that's just a run up to it. I'm not so convinced. Because the more I look at Trump and his corresponding fictional counterparts, he survives these attempts. With the exception of the movie Civil War, which is, obviously got Trump in it. Zach Costello posts, Erica Kirk had not posted on X herself before September 8th. And before that, 2 years before. And then she started posting 9/8, 9/9, 9/10. So this is actually common with sleepers. When you have people in these various psyops and you look at their social media, you'll notice it's almost like their account was dormant until the lead up to the event. So we see that here with Kirk. So do you all remember that account by Jim Caviezel from Passion of the Christ about how during the fifth take of the Sermon on the Mount, he was struck by lightning and he died and they brought him back to life? And he was 33, and that's why Gibson hired him. I mean, there's a lot we could unpack with this particular world stage actor. Obviously, he's lying. But, the people who watch this, they actually think it's real. And I was going through the comments to see if anybody questioned this guy's claim. It's like, show us the video. So they said here, Jim told me 2 years ago he had to have heart surgery because of the lightning strikes. It caused damage. He died during the surgery. I can't share what he said, but he was shown heaven and hell. Well, they're going to release part 2. So Passion of the Christ has 2 follow-ups. Well, it's a follow-up, I think Resurrection of the Christ, that will show up in 2 installments 40 days apart. I think it's coming next year. But anyway, people who are in the comment section on this all think it's 100% believable. Last week, too, I mentioned how Dilbert creator Scott Adams died and showed back up with a morning podcast, which is all AI. Well, his family noticed. And so, again, AI clone of Dilbert creator. So they managed to bring him back to life in a morning podcast. I thought it was weird because what if he arrives at his final destination and he no longer wants to advertise or promote the ideas he was once supporting on Earth? Because if you don't know, and I think his comic was pulled from a lot of newspapers, he got into alt-right, white replacement theory stuff, started making, he's kind of a meme. Whenever he's a meme that is posted whenever there's something that's like anti-black. It's on Twitter. It's always him with a coffee mug. I'm like, what is this? So I looked into it. So he's in that area of politics, but I don't imagine that you'd feel the same posthumously. But regardless, he exists in his previous form, previous knowledge base, in a AI version of himself. So he's been turned into slop. Well, his brother said, quote, he never would have approved an AI version of him that wasn't authorized by his estate. This isn't good news. He's not with us anymore, said his ex-wife and caregiver. Yeah, his family was not impressed with the fact that he's now a digital ghost. I mean, what do you call it? His friends and family were aghast. The AI likenesses of public and private figures have troubling implications. Yeah, that is kind of interesting. You know, I was thinking about this myself. I wouldn't mind if I could do this and, you know, like in other words, clone myself and just set it loose and then do something else. Like I could see it being useful. I would enslave my doppelganger. I'd make it work. Someone says, if we don't define what the line is, where the tribute ends and robbery and theft begins, there's going to be chaos. What's left of your humanity will be stripped away. I said it'd be awful for me to see and speak with something that sounded and appeared to be him, but have no idea who I am. Okay. Well, apparently Adams had said, I'd like to be a model for one of the first AIs, but later reverse his position. This is an actual quote. I've been telling you for years I plan to build an AI robotic clone of myself. I've changed the plan. If people look at you, they would know it's not you. I saw it. I was not really impressed. I think it could have been better. But if I didn't know he was deceased, I probably would have thought it was just him. All right, let me see here. Leo, the friend says, I want to call in and give a perspective on Moot's connection to Epstein. Yeah, the Moot 4chan / poll, any connection at all is highly suspect. And also, wasn't Ghislaine Maxwell one of the main editors for the Reddit conspiracy the subreddit conspiracy? I think so. One of the main Reddit editors in that area was also one of our stalkers. Does anybody remember Janie or Jamie Thompson? Okay, moving on. I don't know how good the phone system is here. I mean, I could try, but I mean, it could go really bad. I'll have to wait a second here. The browser's slow. I need a separate laptop to play the phone, or we need to move to the 800 system, but that won't be until I get back onto OBS. We're going to keep things kind of basic and stripped down for a few more months. I'm planning something of a remodel by the summer. Barack Obama clarified his statement. So Barack Obama was in an interview and someone asked him if aliens are real and he said yes. Well, he's had to clarify it because people have been running with it. The ufology crowd is a cult. They don't have scientific evidence. They don't do rigorous observations. It's superstition, it's new age, it's a amalgamation of science fiction and belief in angels. It's essentially a religious concept and superstitious. It has nothing to do with science. It's a bunch of grifters and government disinformation agents promulgating state created mythology. Admittedly so. It's been admitted, it's not even a secret. So believing in aliens is like believing in Santa Claus. I mean, good for you. You believe in something, but you don't know it to be true. So what does that really mean? It means you think it's a nice idea to contemplate these, come down and gift us with some tech or explain to us how things work. Yeah, it's essentially an impulse, I think. Maybe it's innate, the desire for higher beings to come down and save us. But that is a religious notion that appeals to atheists. So I'm thinking, is there a void in the worldview of the atheists that is being filled by these transhumanist replacements or aliens as sort of the same thing? Evolved or advanced humans from the future. Okay, moving on. We're living in this reality now. Simone, 2002. If you haven't seen Sim 1 or Simone with Al Pacino, I'm going to probably rewatch it. It's about a director who has a completely fake virtual actress, but she gets so big that he has to work hard to conceal the fact that she doesn't exist. But in 2002, this was science fiction. Right now, you can make this yourself. People are already being catfished. Like there's this whole category of people who are making AI MAGA-ettes, basically like young blonde ladies in MAGA hats, and using them to catfish older MAGA gentlemen who have a lot of crypto. And these individuals are making these digital people and making money off of it. So we're already there. Tom Elliott has a good post here. Wouldn't it be wild if we found out that QAnon is Jeffrey Epstein? Hear me out. In 2013, Epstein meets with a 4chan founder the day before the platform dropped the slash poll board, which became a hive for far right memes and eventually QAnon. The meeting came via Bill Gates' advisor and Epstein friend Boris Nikolic, who marveled at the platform's exploitability to Epstein. He said, quote, "The potential for manipulation is huge." And he linked a Washington Post article discussing how 4chan had been exploited to launch cyber attacks and to fuel a hive mind mentality. And I've seen anons refer to themselves. Have we lost sound? The anons refer to themselves as the internet hive mind. But the exchanges leading up to it are worth noting, especially considering the alternate reality game nature of the Skippy video. So far, one person is saying no sound. So I'm going to wait just a moment. Continuing, we see in these files Epstein spending a fortune manipulating online perceptions of his operations. He hired Reputation Changer LLC, removing keywords. Soon thereafter, he emails his lawyer with the idea of mixing fake extreme emails into the real ones. What a trick could be played. And I have a direct link to that one. 2017, about the time the QAnon drops begin, feds turn up the heat on Epstein. Also note, news of his death was posted to 4chan before it became public. This indicates the platform's use for seeding narratives as a part of larger psyops. He even has this, an email from a redacted source from the late author Edward Epstein from 1967 for psychological warfare operations that provides instructions for, quote, media assets on how to label critics as conspiracy theorists. Anyway, it's an interesting account here where he's explaining how what we might be seeing here is essentially a conspiracy theory put there to add noise and to misdirect. At a minimum, the involvement there to me just discredits all of it. And if you look into it and don't take for granted what people are saying, and you look for actual evidence, you'll find that there's nothing there. I mean, look how many people believe that we've witnessed decades of mass shootings and haven't actually investigated to see if any of them were real. You know, it's easy to take things for granted. Why would we treat this any differently, especially when it's coming from the same sources? And if the people taking this seriously and evangelizing it are people like Ian Carroll and Tucker Carlson, there's even more reason to doubt the veracity. Okay, let's continue here. I've got Epstein fatigue as much as anybody. I think one of the other reasons for bringing this up, though, is that we're finding a lot of stuff in the realm of predictive programming. So that's notable right there. But also, the whole satanic panic thing is actually built into the right-wing media ecosystem. The satanic panic, moral panic, always freaking out over pop stars and the pageantry, that's all built into this thing. I want to see if I can find the Black Phone. I think that's what it's called. I haven't seen this series. Let me do a quick search. But the villain in the movie has this very distinct face. And, okay, there it is. Oh, actually, there's a lot of videos on this particular topic right now. This one's even in Spanish. A lot of people, these aren't even in English. I got to find one that is. Here we go. Nope. I'm scrolling through. Here we go. The Mask of the Grabber, the maniac who kidnaps children in the Black Phone. Now, he's played by Ethan Hawke, but it says here, the maniac called the Grabber features traits that resemble Epstein's face. Is this a coincidence or subliminal messaging? Now, I may watch this because I draw these masks, these faces, and I saw this Black Phone character, and I thought that looks like one of my more Joker-esque mask designs. The similarity has spread across social media, sparking debates and speculation among fans and observers. Was this a coincidence or a hidden message? Amid the ongoing fallout, the topic keeps attracting comments and shares, showing how certain makeups or character design decisions can resonate far beyond the screen. So if you want to see a comparison of Jeffrey Epstein to the Black Phone character called the Grabber, I'll post a link. Fascinating. All right, throw thumbs. Thank you, 91 Oki. Yeah, thumbs up, thumbs down, doesn't matter. It's all good for traction. But we take predictive programming or concurrent programming, which is what I'd consider Black Phone, to be a hoax indicator, something to indicate it's fake. Like for me, I would argue that the Renee Good killing was fake just based on the story in Wicked Part 2 and the demographic that the movie targets overlapping with the demographic that responds to Renee Good as a martyr. Okay, moving on. This is another trend too, demons. So Joe Rogan opens up about his fear that demon worshippers might be ruling the world. Quote, these literally demonic human beings that are running the world, participating in ritual sacrifice of people. We know this has historically been a real thing, and everybody thinks, thank God that's not happening now. Then you realize it's happening now. So Joe Rogan has been, and so is Musk, kind of leaning into like Christianity, or at least virtue signaling that they're open to it. But Rogan recently has said that Jesus might come back as AI, and he does believe that the people running the world are demon worshippers. But people are very comfortable throwing the term demon around, and I haven't really heard anybody define it or discern, or rather describe for us what the difference is between a demon and an alien, because Tucker Carlson claims that his Pentagon buddy tells him that aliens are demons, and that whatever attacked him in his bedroom was supernatural, therefore a demon. But what's the connection here? Are aliens working with demons? Are aliens demon possessed? Are demons the aliens? Yeah, I don't know if my computer here can handle phone calls. I have to do some tests behind the scenes. And now listen to this, the Delphi method, the weaponization of consensus and the battle for your mind. I have a Substack article here, but they're talking about Timothy Leary's reality tunnels. Your attention patterns train the algorithm trains your attention. The tunnel hardens through constant reinforcement. What Leary wrote was that your brain filters reality to fit beliefs. So we're talking about the confirmation bias and the reinforcement we get just so readily here. Leary's reality tunnel is the idea that people don't directly perceive objective reality, but uses experience as a filtered interpretive model of the world built by our nervous system. Because the brain has limited attention and must make sense of overwhelming input, it automatically selects what to notice and assigns meaning through language, memory, and beliefs. And it brings up the reticular activating system, the RAS, which is what decides what gets noticed by you. But what this article here is describing is how psyops and other things have basically put us into our own little subjective universes. Again, you can find these tweets on my account. Leo the Friend says Black Phone 2 came out October 25, so fairly recently. Right. Fairly recently, but I mean, when they made it, do they deliberately make it to resemble? Is the grabber Jeffrey Epstein? And the way predictive programming works is the directors wouldn't have to necessarily know, but they might be given design cues or specific elements to include. Because we're just talking about propaganda as product placement, as psyop reinforcement, things that you could look at as planting suggestions in advance. So they're creating this perception. You're watching this horror movie, and the bad guy, the grabber, looks like this villain who shows up on TV later, whose face you can't avoid. Yeah, that fits the bill. No, I haven't seen the movie Black Phone, but I will have to watch it now. Let me see if I can access it. I think I have Amazon. Okay, here we go. Black Phone 2. I'll have to watch number 1 first, but that is definitely Epstein's smile. I'm going to the Wikipedia. So the first one's in 2021. It's based on a 2004 short story, but made in 2021. It stars Mason Thames as Finney, a teenage boy abducted by a serial killer known as the Grabber. He encounters a mystical black rotary phone. Let me scroll down. The idea of Black Phone arose from an adaptation of a short story by Hill found at 20th Century Ghosts. Yeah, I'm trying to find where they got the image from, the face. I don't see anything here, but I'll continue to look into it. I would certainly argue that this is probably accurate to make that association. I wouldn't call it a coincidence. There's no coincidences on the world stage. I mean, there's coincidences in the world, in reality, sure. But there are engineered coincidences in the world stage context. The more connections between Bad Bunny, the Super Bowl halftime show, and Alice in Wonderland. I just tweeted this a little while ago. So when he gets off the cross, I was talking about Bad Bunny, who's running through a maze of sugarcane, which is very much like a scene in Alice in Wonderland. He falls backward. He falls through a hole, like falling down into a rabbit hole. He does drink something like the Drink Me potion. And Alice wears a blue dress, red shoes. Lady Gaga greets him. She's dressed up in a blue dress. And then she puts her hands on his head to make 2 ears. And I think she's even wearing a heart. But anyway, there's some Alice in Wonderland connection to that halftime show as well. Probably worth looking at. Because we were talking about the significance of Bad Bunny, how it might relate to Frank from Donnie Darko, the skull-faced bunny. And the Donnie Darko bunny, in the context of the movie, does contain elements of Alice in Wonderland. Because in Alice in Wonderland, the bunny's telling her that he's running out of time. He's late. So she follows him. And then she falls down the hole. In Donnie Darko, he's in a golf course, wakes up, and this Bad Bunny is there telling him you have 29 days left and this many hours. So you're running out of time. Same message. Jamarin May says, amazing how they produced an Epstein Netflix documentary and released it just in time. The same playbook with the Netflix virus documentary and the CV release. Oh, yeah, we have many, many examples of this. Donald Trump kicks off his campaign in Waco, Texas, the day after Netflix releases Waco, American Apocalypse. So if you don't know the significance of Waco, it's the birthplace of the white nationalists, where you get Alex Jones, Timothy McVeigh, the Turner Diaries, which references the turning point when the leader of the organization gets martyred. Turning Point USA, I've correlated with the turning point in the book Turner Diaries, which again was the book that inspired McVeigh to take revenge for Waco. It's all very interconnected. But the fact that Trump kicked off his campaign there was noted at the time as being something of a dog whistle, a message, an alarming message because of the signals that it sent. But here you have, if you didn't know the context of it, just watch Netflix. It's not like they're unaware of the political significance of kicking off a campaign right there, ground zero. I watched the trailer on Netflix. I actually watched it, but the trailer was like the ATF goes in because the Branch Davidian compound had 1.6 million rounds. Meanwhile, the news is talking about January 6th. 1.6, January 6th. Dominion suing Fox for 1.6 billion. Lots of it, lots of this stuff just is what we'd consider to be symbolism. And the symbolism shows up in different forms. Color is a big one. The green, we talked about quite a lot lately. The numbers 1, 6, 311. I'm not reading any specific meaning into these things, by the way. The people who do are being misdirected. I think what we're seeing is attempts to drown out pattern recognition by throwing in a bunch of noise, where you have people offering these mystical explanations for what these numbers mean. I'm not saying these numbers mean anything. I'm just noticing the patterns, the correlations, the repetition, and the predictability of it. That's all we need to make our case. We don't need to know the meaning of the number or alleged meaning, because it's super subjective, and it takes you into the realm where you could easily be you could be labeled as apophenic, schizophrenic. They want the people who notice patterns to be associated with insanity. Like, it's crazy to arrive at these conclusions. No, by definition, the mainstream are misinformed and confused. Past, present, future. We live in this linear, agreed upon framework. We live in the now, the present, and the news tells us what's going on. But in the past, the news becomes history. The future, we're supposed to believe, is random and these are just coincidences. But what I'm saying is no, the future is already scripted. Like, we know the basic stuff that's going to happen. It's somewhat predictable. But the fake events are totally scripted, long in advance. So our future has a timeline associated with it of fake events that will be integrated into our shared history through the medium of news in the present. So in the present, you have a convergence of real and fake. They interject the fakery, goes into our heads, into the consensus agreement through news. And then if you look in the past, you'll see that these two timelines, fake and real, converged, and they're merged into what we call history. And there's no distinction, no delineation between real and fake. So they're processing it through us, through our perception and our consensus agreement, and the public's passive acceptance of everything as real until proven fake, which never really happens. Because the people who notice fakery don't have credibility, don't have standing, don't have any sort of representation, and all of their accounts are infused with misinformation designed to make it seem crazy and incoherent. And it's been a successful operation this entire time. The only people who have an objective analysis of what's going on are the media skeptics who have stepped outside of the political horseshoe and the rigged alternate reality games that people involve themselves in, invest themselves in. Meanwhile, the indications here are that our scripted history means that politics is an ARG and it's rigged. That voting is a steam valve, gives you an illusion of control, keeps the masses from getting too wound up. But we have no control, and we exist in a global totalitarian system. But it's a soft totalitarian system, Orwellian. War is peace. The inner mind war, the various ways they involve us in these events, in these discussions, that's what maintains the peace. Leo says, next time I call in, I can tell you about the Branch Davidians, former Seventh-day Adventists. Their theology was 100% world stage approved. Yeah, agreed. Okay. I mean, I think what we're seeing here with the Trump movement and MAGA is a religious movement. The world stage church, the Media globally is a world state church. It's the de facto church that gives us our collective worldview. You could call it nasotology. And I don't separate these things. I think that the main thing is government. We got lowercase g governments, but there's ultimately one monolithic government. It's supplanted religion. It's consolidated worldview. It is the one world religion, and it's the new monotheism. And it appropriates from mythology and religion alike, syncretizes it with science fiction. But I think it's supplanted religion for the same purpose, because I think the old religious systems only worked, regionally. They could merge and merge and merge, but ultimately, with the space religion, they merged all of them. So I'm not saying that religion's going away, but because they're maintaining that dialectic between progressive and traditional, but it's been updated. It's the same exact system. Religions have always been mind control, establishing this dynamic between the state and the individual. I think is a lot easier when the state has a divine mandate. That's why you see all these politicians talking about God and Trump especially. There's all this talk about the MAGA movement. Every one of these MAGA cultists on X, their emojis are all flags and crosses, flags and crosses. I guess Jesus was an American, but they associate these things. Jamarin May says NASA is Satan minus the T, hence the countdown T minus X seconds. Right, and the little tongue, the serpent tongue in the NASA logo. Well, if you look at the tree of life, you'll often see the snake climbing it. And the snake is a symbol of, in a lot of ways, knowledge in various traditions, an ascension up the tree, like climbing the tree of life, which is consciousness, or ascending from earth to the celestial realm, or the Kundalini serpent climbing the spine. Bart Dimberton says, God is now the AI watching your every move. Well, AI is not sentient. God is not going to manifest, no higher power is going to manifest through AI. But the elite want that concept out there. Like I've said before, I think that religion is a mask for government. Well, AI could function in the same way. But I don't think you could define the elite as satanic, because that's kind of a misnomer. Satan is not a person or an individual or even a coherent mythological character. It's mostly a fictional literary construct, but the term itself just means the antagonist or the adversary. Leo the Friend says, similar to the bloody guardrail being a key way to identify controlled op, I analyze religion, their view of the political state of Israel. It unveils its role. Well, when I say controlled opposition, I should point out that the mainstream is controlled. Alternative media is controlled, and they're controlled opposition to one another. And the truthers tend to think of controlled opposition as wolves among the sheep, influencers you can't trust. But no, the entire alt media ecosystem is the opposition to the mainstream. The entire, I would say, anti-establishment media is the controlled opposition. So if you're a red pill dispenser, if you're a info warrior, you are the controlled opposition. If you believe that Charlie Kirk's dead, you're controlled op. If you think he was killed by something other than Tyler Robinson, Leo the friend says, yes, Satan, like Christ, is a title, not a name, means the accuser. Right. Yeah, exactly. Like the whole devil thing is largely a construct, probably a scapegoat thing. I've been trying to find some information on the origin of Baphomet because we were talking about February 8th, being the birthday of the creator of the Baphomet. Well, the image itself that we're familiar with was created in 1856. And so he's credited with creating this thing, but also the Knights Templar were accused of worshiping the Baphomet. So I'm kind of wondering, that's 14th century. So how does that work? Baphomet is a pagan or Gnostic idol or deity the Templars were accused of worshiping. So again, 14th century. But then you have the modern image. So he didn't quite invent it then. One of the earliest examples of the name being found is 1098. Anyway, I'm doing some research into it because some people said they didn't really worship this thing. Others said they did. Gnostic Templar seal representing Abraxas. So Abraxas is one of these chimeric deities. It's got like the head of a rooster, body of a man, snake legs. The Great Archon. And that's a completely different concept. The name Abraxas may relate to abracadabra. I'll have to look at this because people mix these things up. I think there's a pretty strong distinction between Baphomet and the devil. And if you look at the imagery of the devil, it's the opposite of Baphomet. It represents the subversion of spirit to matter, the inverted torch, endarkenment, where Baphomet represents the light above, representing the angelic above the bestial. Jamarin May says, I tend to disagree. The technology being used as an interface to alternate dimensions, the ultimate psyop is convincing everyone that AI is just large language models when the power comes from demon blood and black goo. Yeah, I'm sure you believe that. And a lot of people are believing that. And you are likely responding to the propaganda that led you to think that. Leo the friend says, the exoteric view sees Satan as a cartoonish pitchfork-wielding goat-headed demon. The esoteric view sees it as a mythological concept. Neither is correct. Well, the Church of Satan is officially atheistic, and they don't believe in Satan, except as the accuser. And they see themselves as accusing the spiritual organizations of lying. They're antagonistic in that sense. A lot of cosplay. And the reason why Michael Aquinos divorced from the Church of Satan and started the Temple of Set is he wanted to go into theistic Satanism. But since there isn't really a Satan, they decided to worship Set, the Egyptian serpent deity. The serpent's the common thing here. But these are contradictions. Like the Church of Satan, they would ask about why do you need Satan or why do you do rituals? What's the point of that? And plus, they teach black magic, although publicly they distance themselves from it. But the more well-known group right now is the Temple of Satan, who are really just Antifa in goth, like gothic Antifa, goth Tifa. They're just leftists agitating Christians by using the imagery. And their version of Baphomet includes children, whereas the actual Church of Satan does not admit members under 18, nor are they nonprofit. But I think religion is an example of mind war, because and all religions seem to fit this. It's mind control, mind war, It's quarantining the saved, the unsaved. I look at these as compartments, like Truman shows, that you internalize these worldviews, and the way they divide people, and the way they create these enemies. You know, the idea of the apostate, or the conspiracy theorist, the infidel, the non-believer. Leah the Friend says LaVeyan Satanism is a form of agitating world stage Christianity. Well, they don't even really have a public image at all, but their philosophy is essentially that there's no reason to think of man as having a spirit, but man is just an animal, and that we are possessed of an intellect that places us above other animals, but other than that, that's just all we are. So it's not even a challenge to the dominant worldview. They're just calling out religions, the mainstream religions, for imagining that man is more than that. It's a carnal religion, is how it's described. The founder was someone who worked at carnivals, and he often made this correlation between the carnal, which means flesh, carnival, celebration of the flesh, that life is a carnival, and that most people are, quote, marks, who are, being ripped off, wasting their money, playing these games, everything's rigged, and they're entertained by the circus. But ultimately, they describe this whole place as merely a carnal experience, and that they don't believe in Satan as anything more than a symbol. In their rituals, they look like furries. Look at the old Church of Satan photographs. They're all wearing animal masks. Ween Diaz says MAGA references with Magus too, and Trump is central to the files at the moment. That's true. Fifth level MAGA, fifth level Temple of Set is a MAGA, fifth degree, which means Magus. And again, the book The Magus by John Foles, the movie version of it, which I haven't seen, I might see if I can find it tonight, apparently has some kind of relationship to the Epstein story, including the room full of masks and this enigmatic rich man on an island who's faking his death. Leo the Friend says in Ye's HH music video, they were all dressed in animal furs. Yeah, Ye claims that he was hit on the head, and that accounts for all of his indiscretions over the last few years. Did you see Cardi B twerking on the chair and she fell? And she said the government did it, which was kind of funny. But later, I think she tried to say it was AI. Like, that's a thing now. Anything that happens that makes you look bad is just AI. And it's going to work in the future. Michael Lito says evil exists, good exists. The issue is what is evil, what is good. Look, I would go with light and dark, as in ignorance and knowledge, as a good place to start. I think any organization that institutes ignorance would fit the description of evil, and vice versa. That's why I say religion's evil in this sense. Media is evil in this sense. The Black Mirror hoodwink it has placed over everyone to filter their worldview and dim their version or their vision of themselves, and reduce our understanding of consciousness as much as possible to keep it centered in the meat suit. Yeah, that's very much evil in that sense. So knowledge would obviously be, or the path of knowledge or shining a light would be, in this context, good. I think liars are, it depends on, we say liars. Not everyone is a witting liar or know that they're promulgating falsehoods, etc. They're ignorant of it. And all we're doing is we're parsing real from fake, which is becoming increasingly difficult for the average person who still has the world stage point of view. See, I'm on the world stage as much as anybody, but I'm not of it. There's a distinct difference between the point of view of somebody who is world stage centric, adhering to the program, and one who can see the program, see the world stage, and not have that as their frame of reference for their interpretation of media events. There's a fundamental distinction. And if you don't know about this distinction, or you haven't seen it, or you can't explain it, then you're probably still part of the program. Truthers might say this is fake, that is fake. That's not insightful. It doesn't do you any good to recognize isolated instances of fake if you're still grounded within the parameters that they establish. Your perspective matters, and your perspective has to, if you want to see how things really work, it has to get outside of their box, outside of their duopoly. And most people who are, quote, normies, and then begin to see through stuff, they move from the mainstream to alternative for a shift in perspective. The problem is, alternative media is a subset of mainstream in all of its presuppositions. It only adds on to what has already been established. Therefore, it's not a significant enough shift in perspective to arrive at truth. It's just an alternative version. And then you're branded a truther, which is really just lying. You are the truthers. You are the resistance. You're fighting the info war. Yeah, they're just flattering you, these big channels. So you think you're actually part of the solution. No, you're part of Big Brother's army. You are foot soldiers for the PSYOP entertainment complex, if you haven't figured that out yet. '91 Oki says, Christ, in the world, but not of it. Yeah, I think there's something to that. Like the Gnostic concept of Christ, or just the Christ not as a individual, but as a designation. The concept of one who has recognized the perspective that we have the body, which is of the world, but we exist beyond that. And that we should shift our center of awareness to that part that is not of the world, including the ego, which is an extension of the body. And of course, it's a product of the persona that is a product of society, the world, and the user and their interaction. But it's not the entirety of the self. And the symbolism that we often see, like I said, I don't go into the interpretation of what these things mean, but we consistently see the numbers 33 and 42, for example. But 33 in particular has been consistently associated with themes like light, ascension, phoenix, uh, transcendence, escape velocity, Mach 33, the Kundalini 33, vertebrae in the spine, ascension of consciousness, and then, of course, Christ, age 33. From that interpretation, that number seems to consistently describe the soul spark, the light ascending out of matter. Whereas the number 42 is consistently associated with matter, Saturn, the material, time, space, constraints, the prison for the spark, the soul spark locked in matter. 42 is descent and falling. That's kind of why I brought up the calculation that falling through the earth would take 42 minutes. If you had a hole that went through the entire ball, it'd be 42 minutes to fall through it. But this idea of falling, gravity, we are falling in orbit, SpaceX and all the 42s, it's all been consistent. 42 associated with time, Chronos, Saturn, again, versus 33. So light and dark. Sun rules the day, Saturn rules the night. Very consistent representation of these numbers and these themes throughout the psyop entertainment complex, throughout the movies and books. So what does it mean? Well, I think the best way to interpret the meaning is how it's used. And the best of my understanding is we do see light and dark, this polarity, the black and the white, the Masonic pillars, but white and black, ascension, falling. It's very consistent. In fact, so much of it is highly consistent with the Gnostic paradigm that I've been very much asserting lately, that it's pretty obvious that the television set is an altar to Saturn, the ruler of darkness, the ignorance, the soul's ignorance of its own origin, confusing itself with the physical body, the ego, the material self. The black phone, your black mirror, the black cubes that we frequently see, all of that is Saturnian stuff. And I think it's symbolic of this realm, which is, in fact, if you describe it by the Gnostic concept, it is a prison for the soul sparks. It is a illusion, a fundamental illusion, because it creates an amnesic barrier between the incarnated being, its origin, and its purpose. So, in other words, we are ignorant if we think we're merely the meat suit. And the world foments that ignorance, encourages it. And I think it steers people into narcissism and into this love affair with the image. So, like, you look at people today, they're staring into their phones, looking into the black mirror. I call this black mirror consciousness because it's about a narrowing of our focus and our awareness and our consciousness and energy into a limited version that's mostly associated with how we're seen by others. This is really epitomized by the looks maxers. And narcissism, not to be, is often confused. It's really not people who have excessive admiration about how they look. It's not merely attractive people. It's actually more about self-centeredness and the orienting of the self, or the concept of the self, around the external and modifying the external to get the most approval at the sacrifice of the internal. Lean Dion says scrolling and scrying. Precisely. And I've also correlated this with the symbol of the hoodwink, the wool pulled over the eyes. The darkness as a symbol of ignorance, because if you have the wool over your eyes, you can't see the light. And what light is being hidden from you? And this is the secret. This is why you have the G. It's about the Gnostic, I think, in this sense. Like, what light are they really hiding? Yeah, you have in the temple the candlelight that they reveal when they pull the hood off and you see what's going on. But I think if you look at the temple as symbolic of the mind, and I think that's what it ultimately represents, I think the light represents the inner light, that the masses are being kept ignorant of their inner light by who? What about by the servants of the great architect of the universe? By the servants of this matrix god, Saturn, Kronos, the demiurge, the ruler of this realm, the ruler of darkness, and his armies are here to keep people from recognizing their inner spark, inner divinity, their intrinsic connection to the source of all light and consciousness, which isn't going to be found in the religions, which, surprise, they serve the dark side. Michael Lito says, if it was a ball, you could not get through to the other side of Earth because gravity, you'd fall halfway then stop. Yeah, I thought about that too. Like, would you really go all the way through? And people have done calculations. It's just a thought experiment. But I think it was originated by Lewis Carroll. And so in that context, you could look at Ellis falling through the rabbit hole as the first depiction of frictionless travel through space. It also kind of ties in with Hyperloop and the tunnel that drill, the tunneling machine is called the Ellis. Jamarin May says, Tim, just curious, why do you think they waited until the CV rollout to unleash the mainstream AI agenda upon the world? Good question. I need to rewatch AI, by the way. Kubrick, Spielberg. There's got to be something there. Because now we're seeing Spielberg's new movie, Age of Disclosure, coming out, and people correlating aliens with AI. So there might be something in that one. But yeah, so obviously it became mainstreamable because our equipment can handle it, or the technology that the general public has, our computers, our phones, are capable of using it. It's had time to develop the iterations, deep learning. It has huge data sets. The infrastructure is there to support it. All these things are required to exist before AI exists in the form that we're using it. So when people say AI is ancient, we have to refute that. But that doesn't mean that it wasn't released on a timeline. I mean, we don't know how much control there is over these things, but I would assume that there's a rollout to it as it relates to the public. Because we're talking about the media, essentially, and the decentralization of media. And this is all part of it. I mean, the phone is your direct connection to Big Brother at all times. If you don't have a smartphone, they're not going to be able to plug you into their attention economy and extract the most amount of loosh from you. We're all basically loosh cows. We're loosh cows on a massive farm. But again, AI is not going to be Hell 9000, but they want us to think so. And these concepts are emerging. I mean, science fiction is part of the religious pageantry of this new aeon paradigm. Okay, so we talked about Erica Kirk and Charlie Kirk. And again, this is crazy to me. People are spending all this time Erica Kirk deranged and unveiling her to be this nefarious character. But at no point do any of them question Charlie Kirk. He's just pure as the driven snow. Naive. He got tricked by the bad girl. The Jezebel got him. When we talked about the Magus, I'll have to watch the movie. Satanic Panics, ARGs. Yeah, so ARGs. So Erica Kirk is the subject of an alternate reality game. Her and Candace Owens, who probably have a lot in common in real life because they're both psyop actresses. But they're not just playing roles, reading scripts because of what they are. And this includes Charlie Kirk and Nick Fuentes. They're agents in place. They're plants. And they have points of view that they promulgate and defend as polemicists, but they're just pose. They're parodies of extremism. But the people who are willing to look at Erica Kirk and say, hey, look, the evidence says she's just an actress who has connections to the deep state and Department of Defense, they're given this story that's very plausible. But you tell them Charlie Kirk is an actor, and they're like, no, he was a Christian who was saving America, and they took him out. Typical truthers, though. They're given these approved conspiracy theories. They follow the conspiracy rabbit trails, and they don't realize that they've been misdirected away from the truth. Jamarin May says, did you see the New Mexico government is doing a full investigation into the Epstein Ranch? Yeah, that's because of the Eddie Aragon thing. which I reference here. So if you don't know about this, I actually talked to this person a few years ago, and he's the one who told me about the 6-foot painting of Ghislaine Maxwell found at Zorro Ranch. But he's a local radio host, and he received a letter from somebody working at the ranch. And the person asked for a Bitcoin in exchange for information about where the bodies are buried. So that particular email that went to him was forwarded to the FBI tip line. So that got released. So people are reading this say, hey, there's girls buried at Zorro Ranch. Well, there's girls buried at Zorro Ranch according to an anonymous tip that this local radio host conspiracy theorist posted to the FBI after he supposedly got it from an anonymous person at Zorro Ranch. So I'm thinking chain of custody here. I'm leaning towards this individual is an operative, and he was promoting a propaganda psyop by posting a fake tip to the FBI, knowing it would be unearthed later as part of the growing myth building around Jeffrey Epstein. And the reason why I think that he's likely an operative and agent is I was introduced to him through somebody that I'm pretty sure is likely some kind of intelligence agent who was involved in truther circles and connected to people, connected to directly to people, involved in reality TV, and involved in the major limited hangouts that we see in conspiracy circles, from Sandy Hook to Flat Earth. So questionable people I'm talking about here. There's questionable people involved in this thing. It's not organic. It's fake grassroots. And if you're wondering, how do they create this body of evidence? It's not real evidence. It's leaked docs. So all the truthers are doing their busy work, sifting through these docs, thinking they're finding stuff and discovering things. And no, you're not actually discovering anything more than what was planted there as part of a rigged ARG. So I did see the New Mexico government's doing it. I considered going to Zorro Ranch. I would if I had the gas money. It's a long drive. Well, it's about 90 minutes. If I had the time, I might go from there to Tremenia and try to find the underground alien cathedral of the Scientologists. Would they let me back up to the surface? Like if I got in there and I saw what they have down there, would I be allowed back onto the surface? Or would I be a slave to Zeno or Xenu? Level 5 says leaked docs can be made in an instant with AI. Well, I don't think these were made with AI though. I think so you're talking about the leaked docs that we're examining, they're timestamped, there's headers. These aren't really actual emails. The assumption truthers have is that these emails reflect things that were really happening and that these aren't just sort of role-playing emails. Because that's what I'm contending here. An ARG is a role-playing game. Fake people, fake victims, fake scenarios. People get involved. I'm going to do more research into the matter here of ARGs and this Skippy video. I'll put out a conspiracy vetter on it. In fact, I'm going to be working on conspiracy vetter, sort of my side project, but I'm going to be putting a lot of time into it this week. I want to release the first couple just to get the format. I have Canva finally. I've been waiting for Canva Premium to be able to produce this, and I think if I put time and energy into it, like I used to with South Pole, I think I might have a platform for the IPS that does better than the live streams. Lean Dion says the 3 million is apparently only half too. Right. And it's not even 3 million emails. It's like PDFs and anonymous tips. It's the anonymous tips that I don't trust. The FBI says, oh, this is an anonymous tip. Nothing substantiated it. So the truthers see this and they say, FBI is covering it up. It's like, no, it could be PSYOP shitposting. And I've read some of these emails, and I find them all to be kind of the type of stuff you'd expect a bunch of writers to make up. Like, what will trick the truthers? Well, what won't? But I mean, they're writing for an audience. It's kind of clever, but over the years, they've amassed a substantial pile of information. And if there was anything significant, anything damning, don't you think it would have been leaked by now? This is the second time they've brought out the same content. Last time it was called QAnon. Now it's just the Epstein drops. But whatever the case, it's the same stuff. They just repackaged it. So instead of the Mossad controlling Epstein, now it's the KGB. Yeah, it's all community generated fan fiction. And the responses that I'm seeing in these bearded guys with backward hats and cars are not organic. These are crisis actors. But if you call them crisis actors, people are going to call you a baby eater. All right, we'll continue this conversation tomorrow, and we'll be in the Discord server. Just tons of stuff going on, as always. I'm watching that ice rink killing. Again, it looks real, doesn't mean it is real. I'm trying to find out if there's any drills that happened around that time. Shift the burden of proof to the people spreading the propaganda, especially if they're influencers or truthers. These propaganda mules too often get a pass. If they're going to say, this is true, just look at this pile of documents. There's only 3 million. Like, no, you have to actually point it out directly. And I find that people don't want to do it. They want to shift the burden of proof. Oh, it's in the docs. It's like, but my docs, but my Epstein files. That doesn't work. So I asked Grok, hey, Grok, is there anything true about what this person said? And people get mad at me for asking Grok. I'm sorry, but Grok's not the source. I'm not like, okay, Grok, thank you. Grok is a source for sources. Grok is like a personal assistant who will go find you the citations. Dr. Bass Ackford says, Gates' wife getting clapped is obviously a fake story because Gates' wife is a man. I don't know if I buy that, but there was a story here where Melinda Gates claims that Bill Gates was trying to put some kind of drugs in her drinks so she wouldn't show symptoms of an STD that he caught for one of Jeffrey Epstein's Russian prostitutes. So Bill Gates was drugging his wife surreptitiously because he thought he had infected her with something he didn't want to tell her. Like, is that the kind of guy you want to trust? I understand now. Previously, I was all just like, okay, Bill Gates is neutral to me. But that right there, that's psychopathic. But the ice thing, yeah, somebody brought up the ice thing. The ice rink event and ice, I don't know. None of these things are coincidental. So I'm looking for indications of that thing being a hoax. But I think that the shooter is clearly some kind of engineered villain designed to antagonize the right. And it's worked. It's been a formula for, 3 years now, almost 4 years. But now they added a twist where now it's a right-winger fan of Nick Fuentes, which is very incoherent, doesn't make a lot of sense. Yeah, I don't believe the Bill Gates is a woman thing. I mean, the inverted thing. I don't really buy into it. I think that might be more noise. The problem is it's an unfalsifiable theory. And I think we need to really question, and I'll be dealing with these things one by one in Conspiracy Vetter. And Conspiracy Vetter isn't me saying this conspiracy is fake. It's me analyzing them impartially, like Snopes. The idea here is let's just see what the best versions are on both sides. But if it raises more questions than it answers, then it's probably not even a viable theory. But if nothing can prove it wrong, then it can't be taken seriously. And some of these conspiracy so-called theories don't pass that litmus test. If no information can prove it wrong, if it's right no matter what, it's very questionable. And the people who are in the camp that like Trump's a woman and stuff, I don't think you can separate that conspiracy theory from a certain religious framework. But like I said, I'm going to be dealing with these conspiracy theories one by one. I'm going to try to stay up tonight and get the first one done so I can release it tomorrow. I've already written the script out for the first 2 episodes. Anyway, thanks for the comments. I'll be in the Discord server. Subscribe to Substack if you have not. And I'm going to test the phone systems out so I can turn them back on. But I want to hear it first before we go any further with that. All right, have a great evening. Thanks for your comments.